I love the smell of tequila. What is this? This got like lemon in it or something?
Lime. A little bit of
Lime.
lime.
You spiced it.
Yeah.
All right, bro. I
Spice it
see
with
you.
lime.
Okay.
Top it off with the Casamigos. Put it in the freezer.
Ah, muy bueno. All right, man. So listen, you just went last time we talked about your adventure club. You just took a trip riding and having fun. There was a lot of cool lessons that were learned out there, man. Hopefully, we can get into a little bit of that. But I want to talk to you about. Let's talk about a few things, dude. Like right now, there is in our economy, we have like a handful of economists who are predicting that things are going to go in the upswing. We've got a lot of people predicting through analysis that we're going to see recession Q1 24, right? A lot of people, Pablo Herman's talking about it, saying that we're on the upswing of a dip, right, which is where we usually see the recession. And I just read another report that they saw this cross that has only shown up a few times. Maybe you saw that in the news. And there's a lot of people that are clamping on their personal funds in fear. And I want to talk about like how fear drives people to make decisions that are maybe not always what's best. Now I know that fear can be a tool, and I believe it's created by God in order to make us cautious. But sometimes when we allow fear to be the motivating factor and the thing that drives us, we can often make errors and start making decisions on fear. People have said that fear is false evidence appearing real. And sometimes we can start foreboding the future and then miss opportunities. And so I'd like to hear from you about how you help some of the people in your world when you're intaking or you're connecting with them, and then somebody you can just start to hear it. You can hear, man, this person's not filled with faith for the future, but there's a lot of fear coming out of them about their future right now. And how do you help some of the people you work with disconnect from that fear? And I ask that because there's a lot of people right now that are clamping, holding their funds. They're getting afraid of tomorrow's business. There's a lot of in the market. There's a lot of people driving their profits down, right? Lowering their gross margins so that they can get more work because they're afraid it's not coming tomorrow. And that creates this compounding effect everywhere in society. When everybody thinks that scarcity is here, then people are in a race for the bottom. And then profits are falling. Then people are starting to reduce heads at businesses. It's just like this. Even in every space, I feel like where fear shows up, it can be very contagious. Fear can be contagious. And so, how do you help clients that you're connecting with, that you instantly see like, I think this person's operating in fear. You know what I mean? Not a good fear, right? Like, but a fear that maybe is foreboding. How would you help somebody with that if that was something that's coming up without us? It's hopefully that's enough.
Yeah, yeah. Getting into some hypotheticals like that, it can be really, really
You
tough.
love my hypotheticals.
Especially
Yeah.
when you're talking about something as base as fear. You know, in listening to you talk and setting that up as you did, a couple of things that are going off in me. If I was listening to a client kind of, preface what we were about to get into, because clients do that, they'll talk about the big picture, they'll pull it down, and then we get to the root of what they're dealing with. And I understand that framing. I see a lot of that out there. I feel some of that stuff myself. But the things that were going off in me in terms of hearing what you're talking about, next questions to ask, differentiators, right? I always like to kind of get an idea of what something's not, so we can put that away and then sharpen the spear to go toward what is. And some of the differentiators I wanted to talk about it, in this situation of fear, when you got, market leaders, business people out there trying to understand what's going on, trying to prepare for what they see coming. Those are all generally very rational things. So the differentiation point for me is trying to get into where we are rightly responding to practical risks and hedging, displaying caution, analysis, really thinking about this, and where we've gotten into a place of what you're calling fear, where we're not so much looking at what's going on, what could happen, how to prepare against it. We're stepping into some of that, the sky's falling. This is not going to work. No matter what I do, it's not going to shape up. This is my ticket. I'm going to get punched here. My rope has come to its end. And so when that, let's call it external risk analysis, caution, or fear moves into a personal, my story is headed for a crash, that's when we have the ability to do something. Because I'm not necessarily going to be a better analyzer than my client in his market. I'm not necessarily going to have the best opinion on where the market's headed, because frankly, I don't know the people who have market influence at that level. I don't think it's just a bunch of random accidental people all deciding to buy a lot of houses or not buy a lot of houses, or borrow a lot of money at low interest or not borrow a lot of money at low, like things are tried to, the impression is given that a lot of what we experience is just the randomosity of human engagement and economies. And I don't necessarily believe that.
Sure, neither do I.
So trying to get an idea about what's going on at the macro, major macro level that you're talking about, quite frankly, I don't know the people who are determining where they're going to bias the scales of influence when it comes to the economic stuff. I do feel a little bit of a foreboding. I do feel like some stuff's coming, but I felt that way for a while and it hadn't dropped yet. And
Sure.
I also, in the back of my mind, I asked myself the questions of, given where we are right now, and I don't want to put the context around that necessarily, but if there's a lot of fear out there, there's also a lot of doubt. There's a lot more suspicion. There's a lot more savvy mindset asking questions, right? I mean, given everything we've been through for the past 3-4 years, I think more people are asking questions about exactly how all this works than were prior to 2020. Given that that's happening out there, if I were in the room right? I know it's been a little bit conspiratorial. I'm not saying I actually believe that's the case, but if I had a hand in determining how things were going to go, I don't know that I would push it to the limits of let's crash this economy. Let's see this recession come on. I don't know that I would screw those bolts down quite so tight right now. I think there's a little too much transparency
Sure.
for that.
Yeah.
So I'm in a place of, I believe some negative stuff's coming. There's a lot of indicators that look like that. We're also seeing some things that are propping it up that, I don't know enough to say are artificial.
Yeah.
But it feels like there's a driving force headed down.
Sure.
And it feels like there's a lot of work going on right now in our official published numbers to make things not quite look so bad.
Sure.
And certain metrics don't look bad.
Yeah.
But practically, where I live, where I buy my food,
No doubt.
Things don't feel very good. And
That's right.
we live in a little bit of a bubble, right?
Yeah.
So, it's not like we're terribly uncomfortable, but something's...
Yeah, but the bubble we live in is in the higher percent, let's call it, right? Let's say we're in the 90s, right? Like maybe we're not in that top 1%, but we are definitely
Certainly
not
not.
in the same percent that most of the United States is. And I can tell you that we're feeling that cost impact. We're feeling the
cost impact,
indicators
yes.
are very much different. And now this is not, for certain, I don't want to drive down the market condition, but rather the human response to an indicator. And I love what you said where you differentiate, right? Are we talking about risk mitigation, right? Because if an earthquake takes place and we are planning for, what do they call those? They've come after the earthquakes. What do they call that? Aftershocks. So when we're planning for aftershock, if you have a 7.6 earthquake, you plan for 5s and 6s in the aftershocks. Like it's going to hit again. So you got to stay away from the building, right, until we know the aftershocks have settled because the tectonic plates have shifted, and until they've landed and settled again, there's going to be earth movement. That's risk mitigation, right? That's not fear. That's like it's real.
But in that situation, there are going to be people who experience a high level of personal fear.
100%. But that drives to risk mitigation. What I'm talking about is there's been no earthquake. You understand what I'm saying? That actually hasn't happened yet. But in California, we know there's a big one coming. That's what they tell us. Well, there hasn't been one in a long time, which means the plates have been settling tighter and tighter. It should slip at any point. But there are some people in theory that will sit on the line knowing it's coming and then start to almost self-sabotage life. That's the person I'm talking about. Those are the people I'm talking about. It's not risk mitigation, Risk mitigation is throwing some water in the garage. Fear is I don't go to certain places because I'm waiting for it to hit, and one becomes damaging to your life. The other is one that protects you, right? And so what I'm curious about is when you see an irrational behavior that looks more like fear, and I only use the market as an indicator because I think many people are touched by the
No, I think
market.
that's a very good one. If we're doing hypotheticals, that's a good one.
Yeah, because it's touching all of us. And you're right. For years, when I was outside the market, I was like, it'll crash. I'll buy a house then. Well, it didn't crash. I had to just jump in. And I was like, what the hell was I waiting for? I should have jumped in a long time ago. And for certain, everybody is saying now, the market is no longer an indicator of the true function of economy inside of commerce. It's not up and down with business any longer. It is bolstered up and it moves when they want it to, up and down, according to those who pull the strings, right?
I'm inclined to think that it goes that way.
Sure. And I think that's safe. But I want to talk about human interaction for the people that are experiencing fear that they need to get a hold of. Because I could say this, inside of what you're talking about with risk mitigation in companies, fact, like we've seen that. I've been inside of that. Inside of during COVID, we went into hard-pressed risk mitigation, and all we did for 14 to 16 hours a day was prepare for the worst, prepare our people. We were one of the industries that I worked in. It was one of the industries that had special privileges. We had a letter from some Homeland Security group we had never even heard of until that day that was supposed to be in our vehicles during that time so that we wouldn't get in trouble while we were driving. And we had signed government documents that said these people need to be out and at work, right? And so we understood that risk mitigation, but somewhere along the lines, it stayed too long, and we were no longer in risk mitigation, and people operated in fear. What I've realized in business is that, and I wrote this. There's one of the notes in my phone is that those that believe they can't and those that believe they can most often are right, both parties. And so in a world set by fear, whether that's in business or in your personal life, you almost start to bring it to pass. People talk about manifesting, right? And you almost manifest the thing that you have. In Job, the Bible says that the very thing Job feared came upon him, almost like it was attracted to him. If we were to talk about the law of attraction, like I'm terrified, that's the thing my eyes are looking for, and I find it. But at the same time, two people in business, one person believes they can get it done, completely believes, even in a down economy. Okay, so say there was 100% of shares, and we had 10% today, and it's reduced to 50. Some guy says, all I have to do is move my number to 20% of the shares now, and I still don't feel an impact. The other people are terrified, and they step away, and they begin to lose, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy for that person. And the person who said, I have to increase my share, he did exactly what he thought he was going to do and pulled it through. And I think perspective matters, which is why I'm asking. And I know it's hard for the hypotheticals, but just how do you help somebody that's stuck in any irrational fear? How would you help somebody?
So the good thing about doing one-on-one coaching is that very quickly you can start in the hypothetical, because a lot of people like to start there, and then get down to the practical nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
This is my situation. This is what I'm afraid of. And a lot of times that's difficult, right? Because not everybody can articulate that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we do is we have an open space to talk through, and I call it throwing elbows, making some space.
Sure.
Just to see what comes out. And by the end of sessions, people generally have said, or say a lot, I've never heard myself say that. Or what you just said was said way better than I could say it, but it's exactly what I've been feeling and didn't know how to understand or comprehend. And when we've got a lot of stuff in our mind that, we're only hearing it through thought, not through our eardrum, it doesn't get sharpened, it doesn't get hardened, it doesn't penetrate as much. We can think a lot of things and not really have full consciousness that we're thinking those things until we get into a situation where we have to speak this out. We have to engage in a conversation, the push, pull. There's a processing that takes place that brings stuff up and helps people realize.
Can you explain that a little bit more? So you're saying, because you said we think about it, but we don't hear it in our eardrum. You're talking about just an individual that's processing thoughts in a bubble, in a vacuum.
Yeah.
I just thinking thoughts and it's not leaving my head. That's what you're talking
And
about.
they're not being held to account. They're not given the light of day. They're not impacting you because we all know how easy it is to think stuff, right? when you actually say it out loud, whether you're saying it to someone that you're engaged with in a coaching call, a mentorship call, a good friend call, or you're saying it in front of a mirror. I mean, I tell a lot of my clients, go talk in front of a mirror.
Yeah.
You can probably get more good done there than you can with me if we've gone through the process of holding back some of your judgment. That's one of the things that I have learned that keep people from being able to fully talk to themselves is when they actually do start it, judgment shuts them down, right? So I create a space for people to be free in what we talk about. And I inject a lot of humor into it because it's a lot easier to talk about some hard stuff when there's a little bit of laughter.
What do you mean when you say judgment? You're talking about somebody judging themselves? Like,
Judging
isn't they're being
themselves.
harshly judging themselves?
I mean, so many times I hear people say, oh gosh, I don't even want to say it because I feel so stupid. Or they'll say something, they'll be like, doesn't that make me such an idiot? I mean, that's so childish. That's so immature. This is my problem. It's like, whoa, no, that's not your problem.
Yeah.
Problem is the judgment. You're cutting yourself off at the knees before you ever get to walk out the front door.
Yeah.
And getting those words out, hearing you say them, having somebody in the orbit if needed to protect those words from becoming cuts is really important to let somebody process through. And when they do this, and I've done this over and over and over and over and over, I don't know how many times for, decade plus exclusively, when you can hold a space open for somebody to get through that gauntlet without judgment, they get to a place where they understand what's been going on inside them much more clearly. And always there are certain things that they just lay down or they cut out and say, I didn't realize that's what was happening. I'm done with that.
Wow.
Which makes more space for them to say, I do realize now this is exactly what I want, and I'm going to go for that.
So you're saying the individual, often when brought into light, or many times when they bring the situation to light, and it comes out of the back of their head and their subconscious, and then they look at it, they go, I don't want to carry that anymore. I don't want to do that. Like
They didn't know they
that
were
doesn't.
carrying it.
Yeah. Wow.
Or they felt maybe some of it,
Yeah.
or it's come up and it's bit them really hard, but they didn't know why it persisted.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of different things that we use to bring that to light.
Yeah.
And if somebody's really holding on to something, there's some different techniques that I have to really cause a confrontation.
Wow.
That shocks them a little bit with regard to how they treat themselves, how they emote with themselves, how they think about themselves versus how they would another person they were very close to, like say a child or a parent or their best friend going through the exact same situation.
Yeah.
Just that simple little contrast knocks a lot of stuff loose.
Is it shame?
I think shame is a big part of it.
Yeah.
Guilt, shame, fear, anger. And most of the judgment, I believe, and certainly there are situations where maybe this may not be the case, but if you ever hear people talking, the language and the style they use to judge other people generally comes from the conditioning that they have judged themselves with.
Interesting.
Except it's a lot heavier. And as crazy as that may seem, right? Because we've all met judgmental people. They're real quick to cut somebody else down.
Wow.
But usually that language, that style that they're using to judge other people has been cultivated inside. And it's a lot harsher when you get inside.
It's wild you say that because many years in my life, because my dad was our martial arts coach, right? And we fought from the time we were very young. And my dad was a hard coach, right? Like he played hard. And many times in my head, those are the voices I hear, right? Like I don't hear in my head when I'm pushing myself, I don't hear the, way to go, champ. You know what I'm saying? Like mine is more drill sergeant like, let's get this. You know what I mean? And I've realized that over time, and I think I recognize that was a programming because other people will share the voice that they hear themselves in their head. And so you're saying there's almost like a tone in somebody's head, and when you hear somebody judging harshly, this is wild. So I guess I'm gonna open up a different part of the conversation. When we hear harsh people that feel like they're judging the world harshly, there's so much happening in my head right now. You believe that oftentimes they're judging themselves at an even harsher level, and that's maybe where some of the criticism comes from when you have really critical people. And I mean critical, like not in a good way, just nothing's ever good enough. And you hear them, you're like, dang, take it, show some grace. Like, you know, you put a little sugar on that salt. Do you believe that oftentimes that's because people are being that hard with themselves? That's the voice they hear.
You have to be careful with the generalizations and putting a blanket over everything, right?
Man, you really kill my fun on these.
No. But you're going the right.
Sure.
Except to say people.
Sure.
And we like to do that. We like to
Yeah.
generalize, we like to universalize, and because a lot of things are universal, and you can generalize a lot of
Sure.
things. But the people that I work with,
Yeah.
and you have to boil it down to that population who are seekers, they've got problems they want to fix. They suspect they may be leaving something on the table. Somebody's told them they got to go fix their shit.
Yeah.
Or more often, a leader has come and said, "Hey, I need you to help fix my team."
Sure.
Right? Which we know how that goes.
Sure.
So that's the cluster of people that I've spent so many years working with. And in that group, there generally tends to be a sense of pursuit. There generally tends to be a sense of justice. I don't work with people that feel bad to me. I don't want to help people hurt other people. I don't want to help
Sure.
people commit crimes.
Sure.
So that cluster of people, when judgment comes out of them, I have found that usually if we trace it back, there's a root where that comes from, and it first has been cultivated in self-judgment, and a lot of times that came from a parent
Yeah.
or a coach or somebody who had a real impact in their life. A lot of times it gets frozen into the most traumatic moments and then cast out as, oh, that's my dad talking. The more we dig, the deeper we dig, the more we realize that's a caricatured voice in a lot of cases, not every case. And the more we dig, we realize it's no longer the dad's voice, it's no longer the coach's voice. It is absolutely your voice. Because if you track it back to your conscious awareness of that person now, that's not even who they are.
That's crazy. Yeah,
Like-
but sometimes I think a lot of people that I talk to, so since we're going to try to make it specific, a lot of people that I talk to will seek to put an identity on that, as you call it, the caricature voice, right? So the noise they hear in their head, in which the tone they hear, I've never met a person that didn't want to assign a person to that.
Somebody else.
That's exactly right. But you are right. It's like that old saying where it says, like, how you started isn't your fault, but how you end will be your responsibility, right?
You know, there's a concept around adulting that I share with a lot of clients. It's like you weren't responsible for raising yourself when you were a kid. That was the adults around you.
Yeah.
But as an adult, who are the adults around you responsible for raising you?
Yeah.
Well, they don't exist. They're not there. You're responsible for raising yourself now. You're responsible for helping you process those emotions that you don't understand or that hurt.
Yeah.
And my dad was a Marine Corps sergeant, not a drill sergeant, but he was an instructor. So he taught, and he had to whip some ass sometimes. And he was brought into Marines in the early 70s where, you know, you might get your teeth knocked out.
Yeah.
Like, he's seen that happen. Like, it's not the way it is today with all these protocols to,
That's right.
you can't hurt people and this and that and the other. It was a different, so I was raised as a little Marine.
Yeah.
And that's who I knew my dad to be for a very long time.
Yeah.
And then he changed, he mellowed, and I became an adult, and the dynamic changed. He changed personally.
Yeah.
But a lot of the aspects of our relationship and a lot of the aspects of who I thought I was weren't able to change because I was still operating out of the dad caricature.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, I went to Spain and walked the Camino, spent 6 weeks over there, and there was a point a few weeks in after I'd gotten through all the novelty and this and the other. We can talk about this some other time, but there was a point in the transformational middle of Camino where you know, I was walking, and in my mind right now, I'm trying to, cut that out, filter that out. That's not important. You know, I'm trying to be as clean as possible. There was a point where I was walking, and I won't have time to go into the context, but it felt like I was shot in the back of the head with an emotional bazooka. Just like, wham! Almost projectile tears coming out. And in that instant, I was hit with the realization of who my dad is at that time, 2014.
Yeah.
And however I may want to freeze him in time, however I may want to caricature him, he is absolutely not today the man he was that formed that caricature, and he actually hasn't been for years.
Sure. Yeah.
And I was able to reframe several of the things that we had gone through over the previous, like, say, 5 years.
Yeah.
And see them from the perspective of who my dad was at that time as an evolving human being going through his late 50s, early 60s. And it opened up so much room for grace and forgiveness for me toward him.
Yeah.
But what it freed up in me, that caricature voice that I would hear busting my ass over doing the silliest little things, evaporated.
Yeah.
Because my dad was kind of harsh. Like, I was raised to believe that everything that happens to me in my life, good or bad, is my fault. Somebody walked up and punched me right in the face unprovoked. Why wasn't I protecting myself? Why wasn't I more situationally aware? Anything. And what he was trying to do, and he didn't know how to do it at the time, he was trying to guide me into taking supreme responsibility for myself, but it came across as being blamed for every damn thing that could ever go wrong. And, you know, he was a Marine sergeant, like I said, he was also an engineer, so the details that he cared about, he really cared about.
Yeah.
And some of those details didn't naturally align with my life filter.
Yeah.
So I got busted over some really little things, and that stuck with me. So harsh responses over small things that really don't matter if you're just looking at that practical thing. But I had to find that grace, so to speak, to open up and let things click into place to realize what the bigger picture was. My dad did not know how to convey that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I found that place by getting rid of that caricature. And now I don't have my dad's voice in the back of my head. I don't have that ridicule from him. When I have ridicule, I know it. It's my voice. I own it, which gives me the ability to hold myself accountable and do something about it. It's not somebody else's voice that I can no longer impact. It's just beating me down. And, oh, I hate that person for doing this to me. That went away.
Yeah.
But it also made room for the voice. My dad's been dead for 6 years now, but who he was before he died, the man he'd involved into, that is now, if I don't even want to call it the caricature, but that's now the
your
caricature.
memory. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I hear my dad talking to me now, all that stuff that I carried for 20 years, I don't ever hear that voice anymore because it never was my dad. It was me.
Yeah.
Now when I hear my dad, it's such praise, it's such openness, it's such grace. And here's the funny thing. I do hear his voice, and I can hear him saying certain things that he said to me. And I know that's a repetition in my mind that he said. But I also know now that that is my voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that transition was a powerful transition for me that happened in 2014. I don't know how relevant that is to go back to the fear, but let's take that up there and pull it back down to this fear component real quick, and then we'll tag back into what you were headed. Back to the differentiation, getting out of what is a circumstance-based assessment of risk, projection, what's coming, etc., versus what is an internal, character-driven response. And that's the place we have the power, because all that stuff out there, we don't have power over. We have no control.
What can you control?
We have no control.
That's right.
Maybe we have some influence.
Yeah.
Maybe we only have a little bit of bias.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a complete disconnect.
Yeah.
And we're just at the mercy of whatever.
Yeah.
Either way, there are things that you can do that keep you centered in self, not centered in fear, not centered in failure, not centered in shame, that help you keep your head on straight.
Yeah.
And the thing about risk assessment, we have to do it in order to understand all the variables that matter to us. But the thing about personalized fear, we start shutting down and we no longer have the capacity to integrate all the variables that matter to us in our solutions, into our outlook. And if you want to genius around something that matters to you, you have to include it as a variable in what you're processing. Yeah. And I know a lot of people don't necessarily think about processing life as formulas, and I don't necessarily either. But when I talk with people, they tell me the things that matter. And I always ask, how are you including that as a variable? What does it mean? Up, down, sideways? Especially with leaders who are trying to pursue an objective. If they really say that the quality of life of their team matters to them, how are they including that as a variable? Because we can get really hard shit done without it leading to a spike in divorce rates. And I was just on the phone with a client, today's Wednesday, yesterday. I was on the phone with a client yesterday, and that was a question I asked. All right, how many divorces are you willing to accept in your company to get this done? What? That's a harsh question. Well, I know, but look at the way you're setting up to drive this. Have you included quality of life as a variable?
Right.
Because we can do brilliant things
Yep.
around that variable if you will include it.
Yeah.
And that ties back into the difference between urgency and significance, right? And there's a big split between the two. And a lot of times in mass communication, we'll just settle for urgency rather than importance.
Sure.
But that, I think, maybe ties into this whole thing between risk assessment. Oh, that's significant. That's important. There are things out there that we need to know. Versus fear. Oh, well, that's the urgency. This is happening now. This is compounding. There's no time to think. There's no time to process. There's no time to go pray. There's no time to have this important conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah.
There's no time to pull 3 hours.
Yeah, no doubt.
Right? Mm-hmm. So I think that question, the fear component, let's differentiate it down into the response that's taking place inside of you, regardless of what's going on out there. And we can do that by recognizing that there are all kinds of things that go on out there. Mm-hmm. Completely valid, completely real, but all kinds of things that cause all kinds of different responses to all kinds of different people.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, we want to be as smart as we can to see what's really going on to the best that we have that ability to do, take all the variables in, but we have to have a place that we recognize that is separate from the circumstance, where we make a determined decision not to let fear consume us.
Sure. Yeah.
Because, we talk about flow research and flow science and this and that and the other. Gosh, man, fear is like kryptonite to getting into flow states. There are a lot of things that'll keep you out of flow, but fear, deep-rooted fear, like that has everything going off inside of you. Chaos, urgency, running out of time, sacrifice, shame, like it just, the cacophony in there. If you could plug into somebody's subconscious when they're in a state of fear, I know for a fact the stuff that would come out of them would be appalling to them themselves.
Sure.
Not even having a clue that that's
there.
Yeah. Because I know when we tack into just semi-conscious and conscious stuff where we get people just flowing, right?
Yeah.
The stuff that comes out. And then they're always like, I've never said that out loud. I didn't know that was going to come out.
Yeah. A friend of mine just yesterday found out that he was let go from his job. He's one of 50 people that got let go from where he worked. And he called me in kind of a state of somewhere between panic, somewhere between anger, feeling all the emotions of rejection, right? And this individual didn't even want the job anymore. He was already planning on doing something else. He was going to leave and go somewhere else. He had an interview 2 days later to go to work somewhere else. He didn't want to work there anymore. But in the moment that the relationship between both parties was breaking, because he didn't want to be there. They didn't want him there. He didn't want to be there. It was already breaking.
Everybody already knew.
Yeah, that's right. He was upset because it didn't go his way, because he wanted to break up with them.
Right.
They broke up with him, and now he's upset. And what I told him was, I said, listen, we can't determine what happens to us, right? But what makes a man, or what makes a woman, but in this case I'm talking to a man, I said, what makes a man is not what happens to you, but what you do next is what determines who you are. So I said, you can either go home and cry on your wife's shoulder and call people and surround people around you that are going to have a pity party and say, woe is you, we're so sorry they did that to you, or you're going to recognize all of the favor that took place because they severanced him out, right? He has a job interview 2 days later with a company that really wants him, and they severanced him out. He was ready to quit. So they severanced him out with multiple months of pay, right? He could be going to work in another week with months of pay. I'm like, you leave with the bonus, bro. Like, are you even paying attention? I said, the favor of God in this situation is tremendous, but how you see what happens next is you're going to spin you down in a spiral or you're going to spin up. And really, the only thing he could control in this situation, he's already lost his job. He's going home in an Uber. The only thing you can control right now is how you perceive the moment. And I talked to him 24 hours later after giving him this speech, which is like, you're going to drive this the right way. You're going to reframe it. You're going to see it properly. You're going to get off this pity party. You're going to release the pride, because the only reason you're upset is because you wanted to break the relationship. They broke it first, and you wanted control of that.
It challenges your sense of identity because you've built up some of what you think about yourself based on how you know.
You thought you were a superhero, and they needed you, and then they kicked you to the curb, and now that's all that, right? Whatever. And I love the person. It's a great person, but I was able to spin them back in the other direction and say, you're going to go home. You're going to say, listen, our trust is in God, right? We trust the Lord in this process. We're going to believe that I can see all the good that this drives from, right? I was like, listen, what the enemy meant for harm, God will turn for good. I was like, the whole narrative is written so beautifully that when I told my 17-year-old son topically what was going on, he's like, Psh, this is best case scenario. He's 17, he could see it, right? Like, he's like, wait, he's like, if he was going to quit, was he going to get that severance package? I'm like, no. He's like, it's a win-win, dude. Like, you know what I mean? But I had to spin him back up because he was taking the long way down. He was about ready to go home, drink some tequila, have his wife rub his back while he cried for a little bit. Instead, he went home like a champion. And the only thing that changed was the way he saw the situation. And because somebody spun him up, because when he called, it was just like hey, it's me. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just hey, would you pat me on the back? And, you know, I'm better than this. And they're losing a good somebody. By the time he got home, he's like, Psh, this is the best thing that could happen. And a day later, he's in the sauna, enjoying time. He's like, this is literally the best thing that could have happened. Yeah. Just perspective is the only thing that changed. You know what I'm saying?
And if we want to try to nail it down to something, he was going to quit.
That's right.
Now, they let him go and gave him money. So it's almost like he went in to tell him he was going to quit, and they're like, oh, you're quitting? That's fantastic. Here's, 20 grand.
Yeah, that's right.
What?
Yeah.
You're giving me 20 grand to quit? Yeah.
Yeah.
We like you that much.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, that didn't happen. Instead, he went in, and they rightly said, hey, the writing's on the wall. We see this.
Sure.
You're not performing well. Your mind's not really here with us. You've been good. We appreciate you so much that, we're going to go ahead and part ways, let you go do your next thing, and here's a severance boost of a couple months' pay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. What's the difference? Rejection.
Yep.
That's it.
That's it. Yeah.
He didn't reject them. He didn't reject them. They rejected him.
Yeah.
And one of the things that cuts into our sense of identity more than anything is rejection.
Yeah.
Somebody else told me I wasn't good enough. Somebody else told me I didn't have the opportunity to continue.
Wow.
Somebody else took the reins away from my decision in this.
That's right.
Because so much of, especially nowadays, so much of who we think we are is wrapped up in our title, our salary, the company we work for. And when they say, no, you don't get to have that title, that money, or this company anymore, like, that stings.
Yeah.
And talking about it like this, two things. One, it seems really simple.
Yeah.
But it's not, because it's real. And the difference between your son and your friend was that your friend was in it.
Yeah.
Your son wasn't. He had no ego wrapped up in it. He had no emotion in it. He had no sense of rejection.
That's right.
Rejection didn't even come into, like, he got what he wanted and they gave him a bonus.
Yeah, that's
what
right.
the heck?
That's right.
Okay, yeah, but you didn't have that sense of rejection come in there.
Yeah.
Same with fear. When people talk about this stuff, especially around a hypothetical, and hypotheticals are good, they're useful tools, so I'm not banging on hypotheticals, but when people get together and talk like this on podcasts or whatever, and they talk through and they assess through and all this stuff, it can make everybody listening, because I feel this way, I should say that, I feel like sometimes listening to people who clearly, in my opinion, know what they're talking about.
Sure.
But the way they address it makes me feel like an idiot because I don't know. And a lot of people don't like to talk about these things, but when you get down to the root of rejection or shame or fear or challenges in your marriage or challenges in anything that kind of cuts to the core and shakes your identity a little bit, there's an emotional response that makes you do irrational things, make you think irrational things, colors the conscious lens you're so, like, just because talking things out loud and processing with a friend or somebody that knows how to keep a space open for you to go through it like you did with that guy, just because the answers often come through simple processes doesn't mean that what we're feeling isn't profound and paralyzing and potentially horrific, because a lot of what happens in that mind that we never speak life to is catastrophization. Complete erosion of identity, you know, complete erosion of any type of worth. And it's so complex what goes on back in there. But if you look at how people get out of those situations, how people learn to step up out of those situations, cognitive behavioral therapy, talk therapy, sometimes, psilocybin therapy, like ways to fundamentally rewire your brain deep enough to have a profound experience that you carry back into your old state. That's some of what we do with Adventure Club. Dramatic experiences or a hell of a lot of talking. Best ways to create change. And if you can't go have a dramatic experience, you're going to have to go talk to somebody, even if that's you in the mirror.
Yep.
Talk, 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 talk.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think is a double-edged sword is a lot of people like to talk.
Yeah.
But talking is literally curative in so many ways, because we are, and our life is, to a large extent, a product of not just what we think, but what we speak life to. And
Yeah.
I think the Bible is great about talking about that.
Yeah.
There's a reason it talks about it that way. I also think there's a wonderful thing that the Bible does in giving us the coded language that even when we don't quite know what to say, we have some stuff to say. And you were saying something maybe, I don't know, 10 minutes ago about a response to this guy who was really spiraling, was really hurting. Like, we don't want to just have sympathy with that. Oh, well, I've been in that situation. I wouldn't have handled it that way. Or, oh, I understand why you're crying. Like, sympathy. We want to have empathy for it. Whatever we think about this dude's situation, that's where he was. That's what he was experiencing. That was real for him. Even though to the rest of us who hadn't been rejected, it's like, come on, dude. Seriously? You got everything that you wanted
Yeah,
plus.
Sure.
But that was real for him. We have to allow space for that to be considered valid and recognize that that's where he is in that moment. So all of his consciousness is coming from that place. So yeah, a lot of the rooms that might have an answer have the lights turned off and the doors are locked, because that's where he is in his consciousness. He wouldn't choose to be in a crybaby state. No man would. But when you see that reduction, that's real, that's valid, even though the answer seems so simple. So the challenge is not necessarily a logical one. The challenge is to connect at that emotional level and then find some ways to walk back out that don't step on any of those landmines that have blown him into that space where he's lost that ability to properly control himself, right? And that's what fear does. It robs us of our ability to properly control ourselves. You said a couple of things out loud that I really liked hearing, because, you know, earlier in the conversation we were talking about, hey, speak some of this stuff out. Go in front of a mirror, go get with a coach, go get with somebody. Have conversations that let you verbally process stuff through. It's difficult. Well, on the other side of that coin, when we're going through difficult times, if we have certain truths, if we rely on the Bible for some of those truths, they give us the ability to say out loud either what we know the truth to be but have lost our connection with it,
Sure.
or what we want the truth to be based on things that we have chosen to believe. And if you have a belief system, that is a superpower in the times where you're really questioning who you are. Because if you're questioning who you are, you got to go deeper to, well, who made me? How did I get here? What do I believe? Like, if you have a belief system, use it. As dramatic as I am in saying that, I know that sometimes you get hit so hard, all the lights go off, and you don't even know how to access that belief system. That's why it's so good to have a community of people that really know who you are, and can come and connect with you in that place instead of saying, dude, get up. What's wrong with you? We need to speak some truth into those situations.
But wouldn't you say, so a lot of what I'm hearing is extremely empathetic, right? Like the connection of humanity inside of this. And I wouldn't say that in all moments empathy is necessary. I would say that there are times you need to be rescued, like in a spec op moment, dude, right? Like there are times, and just to put a word picture to it, where you have been captured by grief. You've been captured by depression, and you're not looking for somebody to softly come in there and put a warm blanket around you. What you need is somebody to yank you out of there, and you need a full paradigm shift.
Empathy is not coddling. That's important. Empathy is not coddling. I do get a lot of people that suggest that.
Sure.
Empathy is knowing where someone is and being able to take it seriously because you understand it.
Okay.
It's not coddling.
Sure. So well said. But I want to rewind back to paradigm shifts, because one of the things that you said was where that person was very real, right? And where people land in those situations, they become very real. How do we change that, right? So some of the things that you're giving, the first three things you gave were therapy, therapy, therapy. And many people that may end up watching this video don't have connection to therapy, or connection to therapy, which means that they're either going to talk to a friend or talk to themselves, right? And sometimes the you have got to begin to find a belief system inside of you that's going to create a paradigm shift that says there must be a thing I'm doing that's wrong. There must be a thing I'm thinking wrongly about that's producing wrong outcomes. One of my friends, Richie Hale, said to me recently, he said, and he buys and sells businesses, right? Scaling businesses. He's got an enormous, an enormous deal on the table right now. And one of the things he said, Dave, is he said, one of the biggest challenges when I teach people how to buy and sell businesses, right, is I tell them what will be required is the suspension of disbelief. In order to do what we do, it will require the suspension of disbelief because you don't think that what we're doing can happen. You don't think it can be done because you don't know what we're doing. You don't understand it. And because you don't understand it, you won't want to do it. But I'm going to tell you things that you don't realize are possible, and we're doing them. And the only reason that you know they're possible is because we're doing them, but you're still not going to believe. You're not going to believe you can do it. You're not going to believe it can be done. You're going to think that we're maybe got lucky. It's the suspension of disbelief. And so sometimes as change has taken place in my life, I can look back at paradigm shifts. Now, I had the same paradigm shift you did with my dad, which when I was young, I heard my dad's voice all the time. I don't hear my dad's voice that way anymore. In fact, a young man who had lost his father I was speaking to recently came over and he was talking about the very hard things that he had dealt with. And I said, hey, listen, I need you to just for a second pause. And I need you to force the thoughts in of the Christmas that was great, the Thanksgiving, the ballpark, the camping. We as humans are so pre-programmed to grab negative things that were harsh, right?
Most of us do.
That's right. You forget the great moments across the table and all the laughs. I promise you there was more of those. But the sensitive version of you that got your feelings hurt at Thanksgiving doesn't remember the 100 days or the 30 days before that, 12 days. So every 2 weeks you heard something that pierced you deeply and you remember that, but you don't remember the picking you up from school, the being there for you, the making sure you had everything you needed, but you remember sharply the tongue and the offense, right? And so I said, hey, I need you to go back and just remember it wasn't all bad, because you'll write this person as a very harsh person and you'll miss their humanity, the empathy, their own humanity, the rough things that they had to deal with in life, and the challenges they were overcoming in order to be the beautiful things that you're forgetting, right? And so I think I got off track a little bit here, dudes. I was losing my thoughts, but the pieces that in the paradigm shift that you experienced, I also experienced that by the same thing, by cutting my dad loose, by the things that were very difficult, and me getting very honest about those things also unplugged my need for justice, my need for the things that were unresolved as a child, because I was not one that could settle a matter. I could hold a matter and that became justice, but it sat on the inside and the only one that hurt was me. So once you start to unplug some of those wires that says these aren't even necessary anymore. Maybe your parents aren't even alive. Maybe the people who offended you, they're not even in your world anymore, but you still have those things plugged in.
Oh, yeah.
The paradigm shift is to begin to say, hey, yes, it hurt. Be honest, but also maybe as time has gone on, the narrative has become, hey, I caught a fish. And it was, by the time you're done telling the story, the offense is so big and so deep that if it happened to you again today, it probably wouldn't even hurt the same. But because it's been there for so long, the wound feels deep and it feels long. And if you can begin to address some of those little issues, the paradigm shift happens. Now I don't hear my dad's voice. Now you don't hear your dad's voice the way you heard it when you were young. My description would be very similar of my dad the way you described him. And also the way I remember my dad was a very kind person towards the end of his life because I wasn't plugged into those things anymore, right? So I received a paradigm shift which allowed me to see that moment completely different. Through empathy, I felt bad for my dad at the end. I felt like my heart as a human grew with him. I understood the challenges. He had lost a brother when he was young. My dad showed his little brother how to sneak out of the house. He snuck out of the house the way my dad showed him out of the bathroom window, and he died that night in a car accident. And my dad lived with that. And as I got older, I could only imagine the pain he must have carried in that. And it allowed me to be empathetic towards that place where there was impact. But those paradigm shifts change everything in the same way that when we're spiraling down, how can we help ourselves at home? We can create cards that, like, you can put Bible verses on your window. You can create self-affirmations and put them up there, and you can begin to repeat those in the morning. I am more than enough, right? Like, what do they say? Like, people like me, and you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm good enough. Those self-affirmations, if you continue those in front of the mirror, like you said,
stay conscious for them.
for a practical amount of time, you have to continue to repeat them. And then that becomes the voice. The same way the other voices are in your head, if you start to put those types of practices together of affirmation instead of those that are beating you up, and you make a conscious effort, I'm going to start to change the language and the way that I address myself.
And then not judge yourself.
That's right.
In attempting to make that change.
And when you hit that hard space later on, you've been using a different language with yourself. You are more likely to start to pull from the recent language that says, you know what? Maybe you were hard on yourself before, and it was always, you're a failure. But you're like, no, I'm going to be reminded of the things I've been telling myself, which is that I'm more than enough, that I'm a conqueror, that I was designed for a purpose, that people like me, that I fit, that I'm accepted, that I'm seen by God, whatever those affirmations are.
And all those things that you're saying, is the power just in saying them?
Is the power, are you asking, or you're saying, oh, you're just putting a question mark in the air here? Yeah.
Or does the power come when there is a resonance?
That's right.
It's called emotion behind them.
Yeah.
A lot of what we're talking about, and the reason I've kept referring to talk, is because it's one of our only ways in. Dramatic experiences, and talk. I mean, if you, words, the use of words, chosen words, intentional words, spoken, give us a lot of ability to frame who we are and the life that we live. Our expression. And I talk about that a lot. Our expression. Becoming expression dominant instead of experience dominant, and recognizing that the more we harness and wield expression in those times where we've lost it, especially, the more we can not just bias, but truly influence the life that we experience, to the point that occasionally we have a little bit of control. The more you recognize that you don't control, the easier it is to let go of fear, because you're already walking through just a chaos storm.
Sure.
It's amazing.
Just life. Yeah, just life.
Period.
It's crazy, yeah.
But coming back into those words, what we're trying to get to is not consistency in saying affirmations every day. We're using, the affirmations are a tool. They might be a truth, but they're a tool to get what's going on inside of you more rightly resonant and aligned with where you're trying to go. So it does come down to, we mentioned empathy, it does come down to what we feel.
Yeah.
A lot of what we're talking about is because we have a dissonance. We don't feel what we think we should feel, what we want, and you can say, okay, well, there's your problem. Should. Let's not should all over ourselves.
Sure.
And yeah, I agree. But some facts of life as I consider them, there are things that we think, there are things that we feel, there are things that we do. Maybe there's more than those things, I don't know. But when the things that we think or do or feel aren't rightly aligned and resonating, and there's a through line of meaning, there's an alignment, we have dissonance. Dissonance leads to dysfunction. Practically speaking, when people aren't getting what they think they want in life, or things aren't working the way they're trying, they recognize it as a dysfunction. And they start looking for, why is this not working? Why is my marriage suck? Why is this happening at work? Why did that happen? Why did that happen? Why did that happen? And so many people are production focused. This is what's being produced in my life, and I don't like it anymore. It's not functioning. How do I find it? Beneath every layer of dysfunction is a dissonance, where what we're doing is not aligned with what we're thinking, what we're feeling is not aligned with what we're doing, what we're feeling is not aligned with what we're thinking. One of those three things is out of whack.
So how do you get resonance instead of dissonance?
Beneath every level of dissonance, there is a point of divide. And the closer you get to that point of divide, a lot of people who've never been through the process and never worked through it start flailing and wanting to avoid it. For every fear we're talking, and this is a generalization, and I apologize, but also we're talking about some belief systems. You hate
generalizations, even when you gave it.
Even when I gave it. Because I've been through so many conversations with people.
Sure.
And learned some things that are kind of universal in terms of the human longing.
Yeah.
But so many things are hard to say as a generalization. And maybe that's because the people that I work with get really pissed if you generalize them.
Sure. I would say, as you're doing this, though, Mike, the thing I think about is let's imagine 100,000 people see this video, and as you unplug assurance for me, it feels like people can miss the mark. because I feel like those that don't resonate, right, will not listen anyhow.
Right,
And
yeah.
generalization, when we move it back into this gray area, which is like not everybody, it almost feels like then nobody can hang on to it. So I kind of like to keep it down the lane
right.
for video
Well,
talk.
then I'll say it this way.
You understand what I'm saying?
What I have found
Yeah.
personally, and what I have found in working with the thousands of clients that I have very, very closely, people get very resistant. There's the generalization for you. People get very resistant to coming and nailing down that point of divide, especially intelligent people, because so much of their perspective has been framed up. This is a rational fear. This is a rational concern. I'm just looking further into the future than most people. I'm just aware of more variables
Sure.
than most people. You can't pin me down to some little point where I've got an insecurity. That doesn't work for me. Well, let's start with some simple stuff. Do we have a dysfunction that we're trying to address? Yes, we do. All right. Can we find the dissonance? Because I guarantee you there's a dissonance in what you're thinking, feeling, or doing. There's not true alignment there. Well, yeah, but come on. That's because, okay, great. We're still rationalizing, and that's wonderful because this is giving us the context to understand.
Sure.
Let's go deeper. And one of the hardest things to do, especially with people who are really intelligent, is to get them to talk in terms of what they feel instead of talking in terms of what's happening, why they're doing what they're doing, why they're thinking what they're thinking. No, let's just get down to what we're feeling. And it's weird because it's like this. David, who are you? Don't tell me what you do. Don't tell me your name. Don't tell me what you care about. Who are you? Well, it's a simple question, but it's really hard to answer
Sure.
because you take away most of what we default to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who are you? Okay. What do you feel? And then you try to put that in words, and
Yeah.
like the word sadness.
Sure.
Does that really encompass that feeling? And
Sure.
sometimes doesn't sadness have anger in it, and doesn't some of it has loss and shame is there in a lot of things? But what does that feel like? And so
Yeah.
some people try to take it down to, well, see the colors. What colors do you see with that
Sure.
emotion? And I don't get that one because it's never worked for me. And
Yeah, you're
some
not
people-
seeing color?
I
Yeah.
don't see in color.
Yeah.
And some people come down to where in your body do you
Yeah.
feel this?
Yeah.
And those are chakras, and if you tell me you feel something here or here, I know what generally causes those feelings from working with so many other people. I can pull it up and say, oh, David, even though you can't articulate it,
Sure.
this is what you're feeling, and this is how we can address it.
Sure.
And I value that stuff because there's systems meant to try to guide us through a process that is inherently fuzzy.
Yeah.
Like, it's not clear.
Yeah.
And one of the things I talk about on this fear topic, when, uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
In the way I see things, uncertainty is where all the opportunity is. When things are certain and locked in, somebody's already got control of it. Maybe you, maybe somebody else, but there's
Sure.
not a lot of opportunity there. So uncertainty is where the opportunity is.
Yeah.
Uncertainty is where things aren't quite worked out yet. Uncertainty is where possibility is. Lots of people, myself sometimes, people I work with sometimes, other people all the time, lots of people, and we can profile for this stuff,
Yeah.
lots of people get really freaked out in uncertainty.
Yeah.
But if we're really going to go do big stuff, if we're really going to show up boldly, if we're really going to go for dreams and grand slams and all that stuff, we have to be able to walk through uncertainty with a level of boldness that comes from something. So the antidote that I offer, the counterpoint, when there's a high degree of uncertainty, we don't try to find control, we don't try to find more certainty, we rely on a greater sense of clarity. Clarity is critical to walk through uncertainty because it guides you in places that there's no map for. Like I heard someone talking the other night, when God guided Moses out of Egypt, and then Moses, it was time to pass the baton to Elijah?
Joshua.
To Joshua. It's like, hey, this is how I
there's
put
no
myself
handbook.
in the
Yeah,
position
sure.
to do this.
Yeah.
This is how I talk to God.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
Yeah.
You're going to have to get real comfortable with uncertainty, but he's going to give you clarity.
Yeah.
So it wasn't passing off a roadmap. It was passing off, this is how I've learned to do this really, really hard stuff
Yeah.
with a God that doesn't show us everything.
Yeah.
Do you believe in that God or not? If you do, then there's a lot of truth and a lot of clarity and a lot of stuff that comes out. And even those legends of the Bible, I think they told us all those great stories to help us with empathy. Like, here these people are, world-changing people that
Sure.
God worked through. And they were scared shitless.
Yeah.
They ran and hid. They did all kinds of dysfunctional things. Why? There was dissonance in there.
Yeah.
They were completely, they knew God was God, and they believed in him, and he was real, and everything up here said, this is my God, and I believe in him. He's talking to me, damn it. I should listen and be brave, but no, I'm scared shitless, and I'm going to go hide.
Yeah.
Like, talk about that point of divide, that dissonance. Why? Where did that come from? We can track that back down, and a lot of times what gives us that ability is really fostering a sense of clarity. I may not know what's coming, but this is what I know about myself. This is what I know about what I've chosen to believe in, and I'm going to hold to that belief system. This is what I know about the people around me. And when I step into that uncertainty, this is what I know this is how I'm going to show up. I'm making this decision to show up this way. So we try to frame up as much clarity as we can. That's on the outside. When we're coming back on the inside, what I was talking about, the reason we use our words in these hard places and all this stuff is because we're trying to get down to bringing some level of clarity to things that are just almost infinitely unknowable, right? You talk, what does sadness feel like? What does anger feel like? What are you feeling right now? Like, so many people want to avoid having the conversations around emotions because it's hard to find concreteness.
Yeah.
It's hard to find true universality of feeling, not concept.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't like to go into places where there's so much damn uncertainty.
Yeah, sure.
You don't want to look like a fool. You don't want to be rejected. You don't want to say something you might be ashamed of. We call them vulnerability hangovers. I just got really real with you.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, oh, you know, like, oh, the alcohol hit too hard. Hey, the truth hit too hard.
Yeah.
The level of
one night stand of honesty.
Yeah, exactly. And so people, they get uncomfortable. And that's why it's important to have that space for grace.
Yeah, of course.
Talk. Clarity, process. How do we? So much, if we're honest, about what drives us. If you want to find out a way to make a better return on your investment, there are people you can go talk to, and they don't have to have a whole lot of empathy for you to teach you the right system to do something outside of yourself.
Yeah.
Short of a situation like that, when you're coming back to how you're living life, how you're showing up, why you have an internal fear that's shutting off your flow, shutting off your genius, making you a different person. And of course, we're not talking about hormonal things, although this stuff can impact it. Like, it's all part of a wholeness, and you can hack a wholeness from multiple different points to get it spinning, right? So hormones are a part of this. We also impact our hormones through this, and adjusting our hormones can impact the way we think and feel. That's obvious, right? But so much of what we're trying to get to when we're in those places of fear and we're trying to find our way out is ultimately trying to change the experience of being in this body with those thoughts and a feeling that we don't have control of.
Yeah.
It's not what we would choose.
Yeah.
But we don't know what to call it necessarily, so fear's a good one. We don't know what to do about it. And when we're in that place where we're already spinning and we've lost our faculty, how do we leverage our faculty to bring us back in to cohesion or to coherency?
So let me stop you here, because you and I have done it again. We're at an hour.
Oh, wow.
Again, yeah. And so what we did today was an amazing job at taking an entire V8 engine and taking it all apart. Right,
not putting it back together.
Exactly right. So to wrap this up,
I think we already lost some bolts.
To wrap this up, let's put one cylinder back in,
all right,
just to end this, right? So we've already taken the entire complicated engine apart, but somebody who's listening, who we have deconstructed, we've done a good job at a lot of deconstruction. Let's give one key step. Like, I think we talked about some of those, but let's end on the. This is a solution. If you're feeling some of this, these are the things that I would say. Do these things now to get on the road, and let's just at least let's put one cylinder back in. right? Let's start to reconstruct it on to end this one, and let's talk about what is one thing that somebody who's feeling some of that, who knows they need a paradigm shift, they've not been able to shake the tree, and maybe they don't have a lot of friends, right? Like we talk a lot about this on when we're talking. We're going to talk to the person out there that doesn't have access. Again, I'm going to call it the working parent who's working 2 or 3 jobs, who doesn't even have time for friends, and they're just trying to make it by, but they know they need a paradigm shift. Let's give that person that never has the chance to sit with somebody a few tools right now, just a few simple steps. Okay, you've heard the full deconstruction. Do these simple things, and these are going to begin to put you in the right path in order to give you the paradigm shift that we're talking about, that we've experienced.
Okay. I think 3 things come to mind. Number 1, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. What you're feeling, what you're going through, the chaos, the crazy.
Let's look over here. Let's look at them.
It's valid. It's real, even if you can't explain it. It's real, even if it scares other people and they don't want to talk to you about it. It's valid and it's real. I'm not saying that that's it. That's the end all be all. I'm not saying you should stay there. But accepting that it's valid and real, what's going on inside of you, we call it feelings and emotion. That's not really a good capture. I don't have the right word. Maybe Latin or Greek has it. But
Sure.
It's valid. You have to get beyond the reflexive response to judge yourself or shame yourself into silence and staying small and not saying these words out loud. So the first thing we got to do is break off that judgment that will keep you in the dark. The way I frame this, bringing light to what's going on inside of us, is giving it words. It's letting our ears hear it. Next step, active. We're going to step out of judgment. We're going to actively pursue this. Spend some time in front of a mirror talking. Spend some time talking into a voice recorder. Spend some time journaling. Spend some time with yourself, hearing you try to wrestle and process through what you're actually experiencing and express that into life via words and via writing if you can. If you don't have anybody to talk to, all you've got to talk to is yourself through the mirror, voice recording, on paper. It will be a slower process out, but it is a process that will lead to a more integrated sense
That's great.
of who you are, how you are, why you are. It will lead to a more integrated, resonant sense of clarity for you. In that journal, on those voice recordings, talking to yourself in the mirror, talk to yourself as if you're a separate person. Ask things of yourself. Plead with yourself to remember this. Plead with yourself to not forget this feeling, to know these places. I've got journals from when I was in my early 20s. I didn't have anybody to talk to.
Yeah.
Pleading not to be forgotten, to find help, to really get down to the root of what I was feeling, because it was deep and it was confusing and it was despairing. And I wanted a record for later on, in case I happened to go back there, to know that I wasn't alone and it wasn't something I've never experienced before, and there was a path and a process that I used to get out of it, and that can happen again. Now, since then, I've learned faster ways to do it, and I've learned that community is really critical, and I've learned that having someone out there that, one, has empathy to keep the judgment off of you and accept that what you're feeling is what you're feeling, what you're thinking is what you're thinking, what you're doing is what you're doing, regardless of why. They've got a space for grace for you there to at least let us get real with what is before we start judging and talking about what should be or what could be or what will be.
Yeah.
And then hopefully that person that's got that empathy and can hold that space for grace and possibility for you knows a little bit about what they're talking about, or at least knows about your belief system or knows about the truths central to your belief system, to get you back on the right track of having clarity over who you are, why you are, how you are, all that stuff. Then you have to move back out into expressing yourself differently in the practical reality around you. Like, we can't just live a thought life and an emotional life. We have to go do. First, we have to be before we do. And that's where a lot of stuff gets screwed up. We're doing dysfunctional things because we've lost our sense of being, and there's some point where a division took place and the emotional wrath cut us loose, knocked us loose, and made room for fear and judgment to come in, lies to come in, and tell us all kinds of things meant to keep us trapped in that dark and possibly to kill us. Suicide's a real thing. I've worked with a lot of people with it. I've dealt with it myself. It is a scary, real thing. And some people who you would never suspect, because their life looks so wonderful, are hanging on by a thread.
Yeah.
Not because they want to hurt themselves, but because
It's real.
the dissonance
Yeah.
is real.
Yeah.
They live in paradise, and they feel like they're walking through hell, and they don't know how long they can take it. So get the judgment off, get the shame off, number one. Number two, spend some time processing with yourself, because you don't have somebody you can do this with.
Yeah.
Get a sense of clarity, get a sense of being able to articulate what's really going on.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's like turning the light on in the child's bedroom. The monster just disappears.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, find somebody that you can talk to hold that space open.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a step 2A, step 2B.
Yeah.
If we jump on to step three, you've got to start expressing yourself through that newfound clarity into actions that lead to experiences that build up a new life.
Yeah.
Once you're good at being, you have to get good at actively doing. And guess what? You're going to deal with dysfunction there again too. But at least the dysfunction there is more about figuring out how than it is about figuring out who.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good, dude. And I would say, the benefit is if you have somebody, like you said, then it makes this process much easier and much more expeditious. Make sure that that person you're talking to is not a very critical person. Be careful who you're sharing with, because when you open up, who you share to matters as well.
Yeah.
You don't want to open up to somebody that's very harsh and very hard on themselves. They'll be just oftentimes handle you the way they handle themselves. But I would not be harmonious or congruent with myself if I didn't share with you, the listener. Like, I found much of this process after my salvation in connecting with Jesus. And when I connected with Jesus, he was very gracious with my heart. And the Bible says, Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And the Father being Yahweh God in heaven, the Father in heaven, the Bible says that we cry out to him, Abba, Father, that he's a good Father. And him being a good Father to me is exactly what I needed, was the kindness of correction, the gentleness, the lack of rejection. Like, God was never going to reject me, right? He knew all of my sins and he paid the price for it. Like, he knew the worst version. He knows the worst version of you, and he still is crying out for you to come to him. And so I would say for me, the first step for me was that I connected to the creator of the heavens and the earth, that said I was more than enough, that I was worth it. And there's this huge foundational point 2,000 years ago when Jesus goes to the cross and he dies on that cross, that he says you're worth it. And when you talk about just the foundation, if we take off all of what who we are and what we do, it's very hard to define who I am when I get rid of all of the expressions. But that version of all my mistakes, all my errors, all my falling apart, that version, he still knew and still loved me enough to go to the cross. And that narrative is the narrative of beauty, which is like, in all of my mess, you cared and loved me there. I'm only getting better. I've seen my worst, you know what I mean? And maybe you're at your worst now. I would just say, listen, find a Bible, pick up a Bible. They're everywhere. But all you have to do is invite Jesus into your life. And just, the Bible says, if we confess with our mouth that we believe who he is, right? We believe with our hearts that we're saved. And that encounter welcomes us into the family of God. And I always love to tell people that it's a table set before us, and there's plenty of room for you. It's an infinite table that has enough room for you as well, and that God's grace and his mercy, the Bible says that it's the goodness of God that draws all men to repentance. And repentance literally means, the original Greek word is metanoia. It means to change our mind and go in a different direction. And that's what we're talking here, is I need a change of mind. That's just to say, God, I'm sorry I've been acting away. I've been sorry that my life led a certain way, but would you help me? And what I've found is that the goodness of God has always made the gap. I've never been enough. I can say that clearly. I've never done enough. I've never been good enough. I was never smart enough. And there's this invisible gap that I have identified in my life, was God constantly pulling me through. I would encourage you, if you're in that place and you're feeling lost and you don't know God, to reach out to him and just say, Jesus, I want to know you. I want to know this Jesus that David's talking about. And if you do know him, let me remind you that he's good enough to step into the situation. Invite God into your situation. So we're going to hang it up here. Judy, it's always such a gift to sit and talk with you, man. This will absolutely not be our last. We'll do it again.
No,
but
I've got like 4 things that
you got to keep going.
Yeah.
And honestly,